United States has sent a high-altitude spy drone over the South China Sea, a Chinese think tank said on Thursday, days after Washington declared most of Beijing's claims in the hotly contested waterway were unlawful. The US Navy MQ-4C Triton, a long-endurance unmanned aerial vehicle, was seen flying towards the southeast of Taiwan at about noon on Wednesday, according to the SCS Probing Initiative or SCSPI. It said a USP-8A anti-submarine aircraft and a KC-135R aerial refueling aircraft were also seen on Thursday flying southwest of Taiwan over the South China Sea. While details of the air patrols were unclear, military observers said the U.S. Navy appeared to be stepping up reconnaissance efforts in the strategic waterway that is seen as a potential flashpoint between Beijing and Washington. The Triton drone seen on Wednesday as part of the U.S. Navy's Maritime Patrol and Reconnaissance Force. Operated autonomously using maritime sensors, it can work with the manned anti-submarine aircraft to carry out intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance missions over vast ocean and coastal regions. Zhang Zhongping, a Hong Kong-based military expert, said the U.S. Navy could be seeking to track underwater activities by the Chinese Navy. The deployment of surveillance aircraft such as the MQ-4C, P-8A and P-3C Orion Maritime Patrol and anti-submarine warfare aircraft could help the U.S. Navy to reconnoiter warship, submarine and other underwater activities in the region as they are able to detect sound pulses and track submarines. The air patrols came as the U.S. has stepped up its military presence in the South China Sea after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Monday said Washington formally rejected most of Beijing's expansive maritime claims in the region. The move has raised concerns about a possible military confrontation between the two superpowers that are already at odds over issues ranging from trade to human rights in Hong Kong. Day after Pompeo's statement, guided missile destroyer the USS Ralph Johnson carried out a freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea, sailing near the disputed Spratly Islands, the U.S. Pacific Fleet said in a statement. Known as the Nansha Islands in Chinese, they are also claimed by the Philippines, Malaysia, Taiwan and Vietnam. According to the SCSPI, the U.S. warship sailed within 12 nautical miles of Beijing-controlled Quartern Reef for the first time since 2016, and Fiery Cross Reef for the sixth time this year. U.S. has increased its so-called freedom of navigation and overflight operations in the South China Sea as part of efforts to challenge China's military buildup and land reclamation projects in the disputed waters. Beijing has rejected these patrols and accused the U.S. and its allies of raising tensions in the region. China has also carried out land reclamation work at Fiery Cross Reef since 2014, turning it into one of its biggest artificial islands with an airbase, 3,000-meter runway and shelters that could house mobile missile launchers. Meanwhile, Beijing needs to reassess its strategies in the South China Sea as relations with Washington are in free fall and the disputed waterway is likely to be a flashpoint, a Chinese regional security expert says. While policy advisors will be looking at different scenarios for the protracted struggle between the two superpowers in the region, managing tensions with its Southeast Asian neighbors was a key task for Beijing, according to Chen Xiangmiao, an associate researcher with the National Institute for South China Sea Studies on Hainan Island. Chen said, if there is a maritime clash with rival claimants Vietnam, Malaysia or the Philippines, the U.S. will have an excuse to step in, and that could trigger a direct military conflict between China and the U.S. But as long as the rival claimants can exercise restraint and don't take sides between China and the U.S., I think the risk of conflict can remain under control. Chen's assessment came as Washington toughened its stance on the South China Sea, raising concerns about the possibility of military conflict between Beijing and Washington, already at loggerheads over issues ranging from trade to human rights in Hong Kong. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a statement on Monday that the U.S. formally opposes a swath of Chinese claims to waters and the rights to seabed resources within the so-called Nine Dash Line that encompasses almost all of the South China Sea. The move was seen by some Chinese observers as Washington abandoning its previous position of neutrality on territorial disputes in the waterway. Chen used to say that the South China Sea issue could affect overall Sino-US relations. But now the South China Sea issue has become part of Washington's comprehensive strategy to contain China. China will need to examine the relationship between the South China Sea issue and overall Sino-US ties. He continued, is decoupling between China and the US possible? Chen's assessment is that it is not likely. But if the relationship between China and the US continues to worsen, then the South China Sea issue could become the tipping point that leads to a military clash. To Chen, Beijing needed to prepare for the US taking a tougher approach, including more flexing of its military muscle in the strategic waterway and pressing its regional partners and allies to take a stronger stand against China. In one scenario, Chen said the US could send its Coast Guard in response to what it sees as a growing threat from China's gray zone operations by Coast Guard vessels and maritime militia, which Beijing has been accused of using to expand its presence in the South China Sea. Chen said likely countermeasures from Beijing included setting up an air defense identification zone in the South China Sea and accelerating its infrastructure building in the disputed waters. China's actions will depend on the perceived threat from the US. If the US or rival claimants such as Vietnam make any unilateral move, Chen wouldn't rule out any possibility. Ming Liang, a Southeast Asian affairs expert with Jinan University in Guangzhou, said Beijing needed to improve relations with its neighbors, and that could include providing public services. China's capacity to provide public services to the region has significantly increased because of its rapid infrastructure building in the South China Sea. China may need to do something now, for example, open facilities that serve common interests in the region. That could help ease suspicions among rival claimants, especially when China's theoretical evidence for its territorial claims in the South China Sea doesn't really convince anyone. China is negotiating with the Philippines on their territorial dispute, and it has been pushing Malaysia to set up a separate bilateral consultation mechanism for their something critics say is a divide-and-conquer tactic by Beijing. There have also been signs that Vietnam, one of the most vocal critics of Beijing's assertive behavior in the South China Sea, could make a similar move to the Philippines, which took its case to an international tribunal in The Hague in 2016. The tribunal ruled in favor of the Philippines, calling China's claim illegal, but Beijing rejected the decision. Chen said Beijing may need to step up efforts on bilateral negotiations to ensure there are no miscalculations that would escalate tensions, particularly as rivalry between China and the US boils over.